Hi, this is Chris Smith with Local Joe's. At Local Joe's, we help local business. Hi, this is Chris Smith with Local Joe's.
This is City Pulse Newsmakers, a weekly look at the issues and the people behind them in Greater Lansing. Brought to you by City Pulse, Lansing's weekly alternative newspaper. And now, here's your host, City Pulse publisher, Burl Schwartz.
Good morning. Our topic today is a photo exhibit, unusual for us not to be talking politics, but we'll show some politicians, I think, along the way. The Historical Society of Greater Lansing is sponsoring a photo history of Lansing going back to about 1860. And with us today to talk about that exhibit are the president of the society, Valerie Marvin. Welcome back to the show, Valerie.
Thank you.
And Bill Castanier is vice president and also a weekly contributor to City Pulse. Valerie, what was the impetus for a photo history of Lansing?
Well, it's interesting when historians are doing research, one source they always go to learn more is a photograph. They say a picture is worth 1,000 words, and in many cases that can be true. It's also interesting, though, to look at why we take photos, when we take them, and how we take them. Because if you compare a photo album from 100 years ago and the shots that people were capturing to what someone might take in one day today on a cell phone, you can see how technology changes are influencing how we record our lives. And for many of us, we don't sit down and write an autobiography at some point in time. But nearly everyone in the modern era, in the last 100 years, has left behind photo evidence of their lives. So it lets us take a look at life through a different lens, if you will. Not solely through words and through what people have to say, but through what they were actually seeing every day and what they were choosing to record.
And there must be hundreds of thousands of photographs. Well, how did you decide what the theme should be for this exhibit?
Well, one of the first things we talked about is why people take photographs and when they took them. For example, there are cultural milestones that traditionally we have photographed. When you buy a new house, when my grandparents bought their first ever new car, the entire family trooped out of their house, stood next to the car, and someone took a photo of it, because this was a moment of a cultural passage in their life, if you will. And most of us have wedding photographs taken. We have high school photographs, class photos. So some of it was simply looking at these specific moments in life that we choose to record. Some of it also, though, has to do with specific events. Whenever something noteworthy happens, there are photographs taken. Think about the City Pulse. Every week there are photographs in it that help illustrate and make the point of the written word. So we started looking at also what kinds of major moments in Lansing have been recorded through photography, and have those photographs been preserved? In some cases, the answer may be no, based on politics at the time. There's a very rare photograph that appears in the article, for example, of a Klan event. Now, those photographs do not always survive because they are not viewed in a positive light today. Other photographs we were interested in to see how people wanted, what people wanted to remember, so more casual things as well. I had a great time looking through some photo scrapbooks, and there's a scrapbook that we have in our collection of a local family, probably set in the early 1920s, and it's all kinds of summer vacations and boating out on Lake Lansing, and it just kind of lets you see what people thought was fun at various times, because in general, and there are exceptions, but in general, we don't photograph things when we're sad. We don't, in the 20th century, take photographs when we're grieving, generally. Mourning photography was a thing in the Victorian period, but generally we take photos when we're happy. So it also shows us what people enjoy doing at various times. homes.
And Bill, you have been assembling the photos for the exhibit, which opens Friday, September 18th at the State Library of Michigan. What are some of the usual but also unusual sources you turn to?
Well, one of the things, as Valerie mentioned, is family photo albums. We decided we wanted to do both professional and vernacular photography. And we were really surprised how good the vernacular photography was. It's quite surprising. But I also went to basic professional news photographers like Dave Oles, who's been very instrumental in helping us put this exhibit together. And then Dave reached out to his friends. We went to all the available public archives we could and started snooping around in there, looking for different themes and photos that generally have not been seen before, or rarely seen.
And one of the things I learned in talking to you about this story was it really, early on, the journal, Lansing State Journal, which you would think of as a great source of photos, didn't do its own photography.
I was absolutely surprised. I did not know that this was the case, but photography in newspapers and magazines started in the 1880s. But it didn't really showcase itself in newspapers until much later. And the Lansing State Journal in particular hired in 1919 Leavenworth Photography to take all their photographs. And that went on well through the 50s. They were still taking Lansing State Journal photographs. I think pretty close, but we're not sure. But about 1906, the Lansing State Journal started using portrait photographs to illustrate some of the articles, like if there was a murder or something like that, they'd land the portrait of that person that murdered or the person that did the murdering. So that was kind of unusual. But I was absolutely, I guess I shouldn't have been, but I was astounded that this is kind of like they were the first UPI really for, something like that, UPI photo.
Well, let's drill down a little bit and look at some of the older photographs. Cabinet cards were popular in the early days. What is a cabinet card?
Well, a cabinet card is, first of all, it replaced what were called carte visite, and I don't always say that right, but it's the really small photographs that were typically in photo albums. When cabinet cards came along, they were about 4 by 7, and what they were was a card pre-printed with the photographer's name, address, and a logo on it, and then they would paste a small photograph on it. Now they're called cabinet cards because they sat on cabinets, and they formed their own
so for display.
For display purposes. There's always unexpected results, and one of the unexpected results for the short time, photo albums came to an end. People didn't use them anymore because these big cards would not fit in them.
One of the prize cabinet cards in your collection is Luther Baker. Tell me about that.
Yes, well, Luther Baker, in case people don't know, was the man who captured John Wilkes Booth. And after the war, later in his life, he began a lecture circuit where he and his horse Buckskin would go on and talk about the capture of Booth, and he definitely dramatized it. But what he did is he had this cabinet card made showing the horse and the killer and himself, and what it was a souvenir you could buy. So he sold it at his events. And that's probably the most famous cabinet card that ever came out of Lansing because of the popularity of it. That got sold nationwide.
Bill, there was a tax on photos, and it was quite high. Tell us about that.
Well, that's another thing. I was surprised. And one of our members, Jacob McCormick, collects cabinet cards from Lansing. He's got a very good collection going. He's got about 50 individual cabinet cards from individual photographers. So on the back of one of the cards from the 1860s is an excise stamp for taxing a photo. It was considered a luxury, and the United States government for 2 years taxed photos. It could be 2 or 3 cents, which was a lot of money. 2 or 3 cents you could buy a photograph for sometimes.
Bill, one of the better-known photos in your collection is the March of the Ku Klux Klan on Michigan Avenue. I think, in the 40s?
No. September 1st, 1924, Labor Day.
1924. But you can't find that picture in the Lansing State Journal the next day. What happened?
Well, Leavenworth was contracted to shoot those photographs. We verified that. There are some existing photographs that people knew about in the state archives. They're the March. But we came across this photograph from a local collector. And as soon as you see it, you know you haven't seen it before, because a cross burning with 3 crosses is pretty dramatic. They're probably the rarest of the Klan photographs. On the bottom of it, on the stage, is advertising for local Lansing companies. That's how they knew it was Lansing. So what happened is, and this is somewhat surmised, but there was a newspaper the next day, the Lansing State Journal. However, the first few pages of the Lansing State Journal do not exist anywhere in any archives or any hard copies. That would have been the pages where they covered the rally. And there's a lot of speculation of why that is, but it obviously took someone of great importance or influence and power to make every newspaper disappear.
Do we know that the Klan story and picture were indeed covered by the State Journal?
No, we do not. I mean, you cannot know for certain,
Right.
because that paper does not exist. But it was like, they covered it the next day with a small little 2-inch or 3-inch story.
And then what about what do you know about the photo of the cross burning? Where is it? When was it taken?
The Klan typically held their cross burning at cemeteries, and they'd held a smaller cross burning sometime earlier at Mount Hope cemeteries, and that's where it's believed it's taken. You cannot see gravestones in the background, but it's definitely a nighttime photograph. There's only one person that's visible in it that you could possibly recognize, and is a woman turning around just as the crosses are fired.
Let's move on to the disaster photos. And of course, Greater Lansing had one of the biggest disasters when the school in Bath burned. What do we know about the photos from that, Valerie?
Well, they're very dramatic. Of course, this was the largest disaster of its time, I believe, up until the Oklahoma City bombing, actually. And it's absolutely, they're horrific photographs, because you see the building blown in half. You see piles of rubble. And when you read the stories of the disaster, it's very easy to imagine victims and imagine the rescue workers who are digging through the rubble, trying to save lives, literally. It's interesting, though, this is, of course, a moment in local history that has been discussed quite a bit over the years. And I've seen these photos many times before in books, but when you talk about a reaction to a photo, I still cannot look at one of those photos to this day without sort of grimacing as you see it. They're incredibly powerful.
But while that was probably the biggest disaster, there were others in Lansing, Bill, a couple of major fires. Tell us about
Right,
those.
yeah. The Cass fire it's the state building. It's still there. It was 7 stories tall. In 1951, I believe, an individual who was going to be drafted into the Korean War decided he'd start a fire and get a misdemeanor and get out of wartime service. Well, he started a fire that kind of started burning out of control. And it was a 7-story building. The firefighters came from all around to fight it. What happened is, again, Leavenworth was at that site. Roger Betcher, who the current owner for Leavenworth, was at that site and took a photograph of it. And what made it dramatic, it was in the middle of winter, freezing, and so they poured water in the top. It came down, cascaded down, and came out frozen. So all the windows are frozen. It's a beautiful but grim photograph. Well, like Valerie was saying, people took photographs. It was a major fire. So one of the women that worked in that building was evacuated, went to her car, saw she left her camera in there, and she went back and photographed it. We have 3 sets of informal or vernacular sets of photography of that building.
What about the Kern Hotel fire?
The Kern Hotel fire was probably the major fire in Lansing that caused death. It was Christmas Eve.
It was in December.
It was in December. And what happened is it was a hotel that most of the legislators stayed in, and they were in a special session. And it burned. It was right on the river of on Grand Avenue. close to Michigan Avenue. And when it burned to the ground. There were reports of people jumping out the back into the Grand River, which were never confirmed. But we have photographs of that, which were taken by professional photographers, because the conflagration was just astounding. It was all, mostly a wooden structure.
Where was the Kern Hotel?
Kern was about a half block in on Grand Avenue, what is now Grand Avenue. So it'd be kind of
Off Michigan?
Off Michigan, kind of across where the Kern Hotel is. In fact, there's a historical marker.
The Radisson.
Yep, there's a historical marker there now.
Okay. Lake, you've got a section of the display on amusements and just what people like to do. Tell us about some of those.
Well, one of the things, as Val mentioned before, is people took things that when they were having fun. So there was Waverly Park amusement at the corner of Waverly and about Mount Hope. And then there was Lake Lansing Amusement Park at different eras. Waverly was earlier, and people would stand in front of the roller coaster and have their picture taken, or at picnics and rides and things like that, or on waterboat rides. That was very common, which a lot of people didn't know. That was a big deal to get on a boat and either go up and down the Grand River or on Pine Lake at the time, which was the name before Lake Lansing. And so we've got a lot of amateur photography of that we've paired with professional photography. But it takes a look back at a time when it was very innocent. Another photograph that we got that I did not know they did this is the Lansing State Journal used to sponsor major events like the Detroit Tigers in the World Series in 1932. They set up an electronic board, a scoreboard on the front of their building, and would rent seats on bleachers and people standing room only to watch the score. And you could follow the player, kind of like on one of those old games as they went around the base. But that was the only way to really hear about the game at that time, live.
Yeah, it's of course part of Ronald Reagan's past that when that radio announcers would reenact baseball. Probably that came along about the same time.
Right. I forgot about that story, but that was, yeah. They never told you at the time either.
Right.
They were reenacting it. It was live.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about some of the buildings you have photos of in the exhibit. I'm sure the Bogie Tower must be among them, but what are some of those significant buildings?
Well, the Bogie Tower has some great construction photos. Of course, when it was built, it was the old tower, and it was the tallest building and remains the tallest building in downtown Lansing. So if you've seen those iconic New York photographs of skyscrapers being built and guys having lunch sitting on the beams as they're hanging in the air, we have those types of photos actually for the construction of the old tower as well. They're really incredible. There are some buildings, of course, like the Capitol, that are photographed all the time. We have photographs of that building that date back to the construction of it. But it's interesting, too, with a building like that, to look at when and how it's being photographed. For example, Michigan State students, after they would win a football game in the early 20th century, would all go on down to the Capitol, pile all over the steps, climb up on the stonework, and they would take a photograph with band members and football players right in the front, and then they would actually write on the photograph the winning score of the game. Or sometimes they would have placards they would hold up. So this was a way of celebrating.
Well, speaking of climbing up on the Capitol, you have some fascinating photos of a man who did that professionally.
Yes.
Val will know more about it because she'll know the date.
Harry Gardner was his name. He actually climbed the building in the 19-teens. I'm forgetting the exact year. He was called the Human Fly, and this was what he did to make a living. He climbed tall buildings. He climbed many Capitol buildings, and he would make quite a production of it. He would start off at the very bottom of the building. He would pop into windows, run down the hall, pop out another window. He would climb along the string courses of stone that are on the building. And of course, everyone would turn out to watch him do this. When you see photographs, sometimes occasionally you'll see bits of crowd, and I mean, the front lawn was just packed. Interestingly though, when he did this, he was actually reenacting an earlier climb on the dome that happened about 1880, where Alan Shattuck climbed the dome initially to first repaint it. And of course, the Capitol has been subject of many photographs this summer because we're once again painting that dome, and we have scaffolding up around it. And it amazes me how many people, just with their cell phones, are snapping photos of the work, and it appears on Facebook and so on. It reminds us that as the capital city, we identify with these things when they happen. And a part of the city's story is a part of our own personal story too.
One of the big changes in Lansing was the construction of 496, and of course people who weren't around when this happened I presume in the 50s and 60s, may not be aware of what was there. Bill and Valerie, what did we lose?
Well, it started about in 1966, and it was finished in 1970, which is a very fast track. Basically, it took like a lawnmower through the center of the city. It cut out about 880 businesses and family homes, mostly family homes, and dead-ended 35 streets on each side of St. Joe and Main Street. It was very controversial. Today, people just drive down it and think it's a smooth ride, but what we've got are aerial photographs that show 1949, obviously before this work had begun, and we're comparing it to photographs taken in 1971 by Abrams Aerial. And it dramatically shows what was lost with this path going through the city. We can never go back, but a lot of families were disrupted.
And a lot of black families.
Yes, and one of the things, good and bad, that happened, it dislocated black families, but it also caused the city to be desegregated more. They had to go somewhere. I mean, you put 800 families out, they had to move into neighborhoods. That caused white flight, which we suffered through until probably the 70s. So there was a lot, and that was typical if this would have been built in Detroit, I-75, or same thing. But we have photographs of that being built. We have a photo of a house being torn down. We have a very ironic photo of a curved dash Olds breaking the opening ribbon on it. And what's ironic about it is one of the houses torn down was Olds' home, his mansion at corner of Washington and St. Joe.
And the photos from the construction of 496 also show another important development in Lansing photography, which was aerial photography. Tell us about the role of Abrams Aerial in our community.
Well, Ted Abrams was a pilot, obviously, and he began doing that right after World War I. But he shot his first aerial photograph about 1928 for the state of Michigan. Strangely enough, it was down in the Detroit area, and that Abrams aerial photography became quite a large business. Most of the aerial photography that you see anywhere in Michigan in the Midwest was done by him.
This is before drones.
This was way before drones. And what was interesting is he just wasn't a photographer. He invented a plane, a specialized plane with one engine that was all glassed front. It was very unusual. It's in the Smithsonian now. And he also invented specialized photography equipment to take these pictures. These things would fill a garage, a massive garage, when they took a certain grid. And they're still used today. The city of Lansing still uses the 1949 and 1971 aerials today. What
is the curved dash?
The curved dash was the first car that RE Olds commercially and successfully produced. And it's unusual because it's got the big scooping, like a sleigh, with a single little handle that you steer the car with. That's an interesting photograph too, because we've got a photograph of that going up the Capitol steps.
Well, we're almost out of time, but I wanted to touch a little more on family albums and the importance of them in this exhibit. Valerie, do you want to tackle that one?
Well, family albums are how we chronicle our own histories, and you can learn some very personal things about a family by looking through their album. They're generally things that are meant to be kept inside of the family. You might have them setting out for people to look through when they come over to your house, but it really gives you a glimpse into people's personal lives when you look through these photographs. It's very insightful.
Well, very good. We're going to look at quite a few photos in a minute. But I do want to just mention that this exhibit opens Friday. That's September 18th at the State Library of Michigan on the 4th floor. I believe it's an unticketed event. and it'll be there through the end of December. And you can get a sneak preview of a few of the photographs in this week's City Pulse in our cover story by Larry Cosentino. Valerie Marvin, President of the Historical Society, congratulations on all the good work your group is doing. How old is it now?
Well, the Historical Society has existed since the 1940s, but we've become much more active in about the last 5 years.
And if people want to find out more about it, what's your website?
They can go to lansinghistory.org.
lansinghistory.org. Bill Castanier, thanks for all the time you spent helping put this exhibit together and put this show together for us.
Thank you.
All right, let's go out looking at some photos. Have a great weekend. We'll see you next week.